Good day, class. My name is Dr. Kays. How you doing? Hope everyone's doing well this week. Just an admin note, make sure you get all your work in. Make sure you review the things that are due for this upcoming week and also for the week coming up next week, I should say. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to me. All right, this week we're going to talk about decision making and problem solving, right? So decision making probably is one of the biggest things that can make or break a company. All right. So um, when you run a company or you're part of an organization, you want there to be sound decision making, because decisions that are made will again have a huge impact on whether or not the company is successful, and how well everyone does and how long people stick around. There's a lot of things that go into the whole decision making apparatus, right? So when we talk about decision making, really talking about choosing between alternatives, right? Like deciding which one is the best course of action that we need to take in order to address the problem at hand, or to reach a certain goal, or whatever the case may be. We come to a decision point as to whether or not we need to do something or not. Okay. And all that is part of the problem solving process. Okay, we're trying to always get to a point where we have a solution for the problems that arise and the challenges that we know we're going to face as a company. And so, when we talk about solving problems, decision making is a crucial part in making sure that those problems get solved in the most appropriate way. One bad decision can make your problem worse, vice better. All right. So you have to keep that in mind. All right. But how do we go about making decisions, and what are those things that impact our decision making abilities? All right. And so the first thing is really about information, right? How much information do I have? I didn't say data, information, right? And so data is a little different. Data is just a lot of numbers. Data, that you collect data. You just have, they don't really say anything, right? It's only important or really relevant when you take that data and you make it into information. Once you have that information, you can kind of use that to kind of gauge as to, okay, what are the best actions that I can take in order to reach this goal right here, right? And so if you look at the diagram here with this information, and the information has an impact on the outcome here, the action outcome probabilities, the value of outcomes relative to goals, and then alternative actions. And so you see here we're talking about really some statistics here, right? What is the likelihood of certain things happening, and the probability of those things occurring? So as we look at the information and how it impacts the different decision-making outcomes that could probably happen, right? And also, how does it relate to some of the alternative actions, right? If I have a piece of information, and I know it's going to correlate to some probability, then if I know that's a possible outcome, then okay, what are the actions that I take in order to either make sure that outcome doesn't happen, or I increase the chances of that outcome happening. um, so you have to be careful. First, this is where it's important, where it's vital that you understand where you get your information from, what was the source, right? How accurate is the information? You're never going to have 100% information. You'll have 70, 80%, and you have to make a decision based on that, right? And so you have to be cognizant of all those things prior to you taking action. All right, some different type of decisions and their frequencies, right? And so we have what we call program decision. And program decision, all that is that it's something that happens enough times that we already know the answer, right? And so instead of going back and trying to like make a decision on it, we already know, like, the decision is kind of automatic, right? And so we'll build a rule for it, such as, you know, if if you're late with your schoolwork, it's 10% off, right? So I made a decision to deduct points from the students based on their tardiness. But if it's something that occurs all the time, and so I'm not going to go back and keep making that same decision over and over again. I can just put a rule in place that lets everybody know, like, this is the standing rule, and that there's no decision to be made whether or not I'm going to deduct the points or not. I am going to deduct the points based on the fact that it's a program decision, right? Decision rule basically tells decision makers an alternative to choose, right? Once they have the predetermined information about the decision situation, right? And so basically, it's kind of a a guide, sort of, right? I have this piece of information, so based on that piece of information, I'm going to choose this, right? Because that's the way. That's kind of like what I'm supposed to choose, right? Um, think of the instance of, hey, I got two jobs, A and B. A is offering me 90,000, B is offering me 100,000. As a rule, right, you should always take more money, right? But again, there's some other things that may be going on with the job. But based on the predetermined information, I'm gonna make a decision to take the job with the most money, all right? And so that's a decision rule. Non-programmed decision basically is something that doesn't happen very often, and there's no really set standard or set rule, and so you kind of have to go with circumstances, right? More situational than anything else, and try to figure out, okay, um, since this doesn't happen very often, I probably need to take my time and really look at the factors and the, circumstances around this particular situation, and then garner as much information I can, and then make a decision on what I need to do. Okay, so here's a quick chart here, or table, I should say, um, annotating differences between the characteristics of program decisions and non-program decisions. Right, type of decisions, the consequences, and then the basis for solution. All right. And so you can take a look at this when you get opportunity, but you can see that there are definitely some serious differences between a program and a non-program decision, and it should be, right? So because the program decision, everybody knows, right? Everybody knows, like, this is what the outcome is going to be. Non-program decisions, I'm not really sure about the outcome. It could go either way. So we have to really look at what's going on. All right, so some of the information required for decision making. All right, because this is uncertainty, right? Like, how certain am I that a certain decision is going to result in a particular outcome? This is where the probability comes in, right? What are my chances of me making a decision and this particular outcome happening? What are the risks, right? What's the risk of me making the decision, right? Am I taking too much risk and too little risk? Am I risk averse, right? So you have to really, sometimes you do a risk assessment or risk analysis, right? Most companies do that depending on what the endeavor is, but a risk assessment is definitely one of those things where companies have a template for, and they use it to assess risk on a variety of things. All right, the condition of uncertainty, right? Where there's just not enough information, right, to really figure out what's going to happen, right? What's the probability of the outcomes, right? I just don't have enough information, data, or information um, to come to some reasonable, educated decision, right, or educated guess, whatever I want to call it, right? And so that's the condition of uncertainty, right? So you have to be, cognizant of that also, and how that works. Okay, so here another, diagram, illustrating the alternative decision making conditions. Okay, alternative outcomes on the different making decisions. And so you can see where, the information condition, the alternatives, the probability of it happening, the outcome, and then goal to maximize profits. Again, maximizing profits is what we're always looking for as a institution or place of business. And so every decision that we make is going to be related in some shape, form, or fashion to the bottom line. Okay. All right. So a couple different approaches to decision making. All right, there's the rational approach, the behavioral approach, and then the practical approach. And we're going to look at each one um, a little more in depth. Okay, so when we talk about the rational approach is basically a systematic way of making decisions, right? Step by step, based on a certain criteria, and we're going to make a decision based on our rational thought, right? We're going to kind of state the goal, okay? Identify the problem, right? Determine the decision types, come up with some, alternatives or some options, and then we're gonna, kind of weigh each one, right? The pros and cons of each one, and then we're gonna choose a decision. We're gonna implement that decision, and then we're gonna see, if that decision was the right decision by evaluating it, right? When we talk about control, measure and adjust, right? And so we'll evaluate it, and then if it doesn't really pan out the way we want, then we're going for the adjust, okay? And so the rational approach is very much in line with, kind of the scientific method, and we're doing research or just making decisions, based on, what the situation is, the facts, setting out a plot, and just, going off of what's in front of you and what really is the best rational approach. All right. Some strengths of the rational decision making, the rational approach, I just say, um, is that, okay, it forces decision in logical sequential manner, right? Of course. So a rational decision makes you go kind of in a step by step orderly fashion to come to some conclusion, right? Um, it also allows you to do a little more deep dive, right? And look at the information and base your decision based on, on information and not emotion or external pressure, right? External factors, right? The weakness is that it's very, rigid, right? It's not flexible, okay? Because you have to follow the steps and you have to follow the rules, right? Information, again, limited by time or cost constraints, right? Not all the options are easily quantified. So, you may have an option, but it's not easy really to put it together or to explain it to others, right? And try to figure out, okay, yes, this is a good, approach or good answer in theory, but how do we really do it, right? And then basically, the outcomes are unknown due to unpredictability of future, right? I don't know what the future holds, and so, of course, it's going to be hard for me to really gauge on what's going to happen based on that, right? And we have evidence-based management, which is really kind of sort of related to rational decision making, okay? But really, um, the whole point is to, look at the facts, right? and and really decide, okay, um, how can I get, the best results, right? By getting the best information, by getting the best, um, um, evidence, in order to make my decision, right? And so when you look at evidence-based management, right, you don't necessarily make decisions based on on things that haven't been used before. Okay, you're looking at past experiences, past situation, past results, to make your decision, right? That's why it's called evidence-based, because now we're looking at, okay, from 2010 to 2015, this is what we did, this was what the outcome was, and now we're in 2021, and so we have the same situation, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we approach this? How did, what did we do last time, right? And are we gonna make a decision based on the current situation, or are we gonna make a decision based off of what happened prior to? Again, it depends on how you approach it. If it's evidence based or if it's rational approach, right? You have the behavioral approach, okay, to decision making. All right. So you got the administrative model, which is a subset of the behavioral approach, right? And so, excuse me, that it says that people or that use this approach are bounded with operate with bounded rationality rather than with perfect rationality, right? And then it explains bounded rationality as being um, decision making based on a meaningful subset of relevant information. Okay, so that's the key there. Subset of relevant information. Now, when you get to the rational, approach, you're gonna have a whole bunch of information. Doesn't mean it's all relevant, right? But you can still make decisions based on that information because you're thinking that maybe it might be relevant, it might have some impact, but you don't know, right? When you're talking about the administrative model, we have an idea of okay, what's relevant, what's not, okay, and so we're going to make decisions based on the relevant information and discard those things that we know for sure don't have any impact on our decision making, right? Some characteristics of the administrative model. Um, Procedure and rule of thumbs reduce uncertainty, all right? Sub-optimizing, accepting less than the best outcome, all right? Excuse me, choosing first encounter alternative that solves the problem, okay? So when we're talking about sub-optimizing, we're not looking for the perfect answer. Okay, we're looking for the answer that works. All right, and it may not be necessarily the best choice or the best alternative, but you know what, it works for right now, and we're gonna go with it. Okay. Um, Satisficing is more like okay, first thing that's on the table, we're going with it. All right, first thing that gets thrown at us, first deal we get, we're biting. Okay, and so when you talk about satisficing, you're looking at really, hey, I'm not really doing any really in-depth analysis or looking at anything too hard. I'm really just saying, hey, first first thing that pops up, that's what we're gonna go with. Some other forces in decision making, right? And again, if we think about a SWOT E, right? The strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats, and then E stands for external, right? We do a SWOT E, you'll get into some of these external forces that have an impact on our decision making, okay? And specifically our behavioral forces in decision making, okay? Political forces, ethics, risk propensity, intuition, escalation and commitment, social norms, family. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that play a role in decision making that are external to the organization, and that but they still have an influence on how you make your decisions, right? Prospect theory argues that when people make decisions in a condition of risk, they are more motivated to avoid losses than they are to see gains, right? And so when we talk about prospect theory, we're just trying to mitigate our losses, okay? We're trying to mitigate our losses. We don't want to lose anyway. If we are going to lose, we need to, you know, um, keep them as minimal as possible. We're not really trying to come up. So think of a situation where um, you have something, you're trying to sell it, and all you care about is breaking even, right? You're not really trying to make any money off of it. You just want to break even. This is a prospect theory, right? I just want to make sure that I'm not losing, right? I'm breaking even. I didn't make any money, but I didn't lose anything either. So this is, a way in which we can, approach decision making, by making sure we mitigate some of our losses and or not have any even though we don't necessarily gain anything, right? And that might be the best um, alternative at the moment, right? To just say, hey, we're going to break even on this one, but the next one we will, maybe gain, or maybe it was a situation where we were down in the hole and all we are thinking about is breaking even. I'm sure people that go to Las Vegas or gamble have this mentality, right? If you go to Vegas and you bet $1,000 and you down $500, your aim at that point is no longer to make money. Your aim is to, kind of break even, get your money back, right? Because once you get your money back, you're like, okay, cool. I got what I started with and I'm out of here. I'm going home, right? And so that's the whole, kind of thought behind the prospect theory, right? The integrated approach or practical approach combines the steps of rational with the conditions and the behavioral approach, right, to create a more realistic approach. And so here we have kind of a hybrid where we're mixing different, approaches and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best decision we can make, right, based on the two approaches. And so we will, have a rational approach where we'll step by step look at the situation, but then we'll also look at, hey, what are some of the external forces? What are some of the things that can impact our, the outcome, right? And so we have to look at that also. Hybrid approaches, just like I said, a combination of all, kind of all the different approaches, and also, supported by research, right? Um, it, it's, I think it's pretty evident to anyone that decisions, can aren't made or aren't impacted by just one thing. There's a number of things that have an impact on your decision making, and so it's important that you take all those things into consideration and kind of figure out, okay, where do I want to go with this particular decision? All right. So another important aspect is group decision making. Okay, because you're never going to really make decisions on your own, not in the organization. For the most part, you will always have some kind of group dynamic or someone else that you have to confer with in order to make a decision or trying to make a decision, making it final. And so we have to, really look at that and say, okay, as a group, right, as a more than one, how do we go about making decisions, right? And so some things that affect group decisions are group polarization, group think, and group problem solving. So let's get into each one, right? And so when we talk about polarization, right, we're talking about the tendency for groups' average post-discussion attitudes to be more extreme than its average pre-discussion attitudes, okay? So what it's saying here is that um, the discussion after, you know, um, after the decision is made is a little bit more tenuous than it is pre, right? The attitude before decision is made is really, kind of like, okay, whatever, I'll go either way. But then once the decision is made, all of a sudden you have a problem with it, right? Oh, I didn't really like that decision. Oh, I didn't, you know, that's not what that's not how I would have gone, or maybe we should have thought, decided on something else. At that point, it's too late, right? And so you have this polarization. You have this, kind of dichotomy of, hey, we chose this, but you really wanted this, or you were indifferent and didn't really, step up. So you have your group polarization that occurs based on that. Some people will be on one side of the decision, some people will be on the other side of the decision. All right. So why does that happen? Okay. Well, it's really about, just having difference of opinion. Okay. So we may just not see things the same way, or we may all, or maybe a good portion of us have a common view, right? A common opinion or consensus on a particular decision, and the decision making, process and what should happen. And so, again, you have one side of the coin, you have another side of the coin. And so now we're polarized, right? We're kind of in a stalemate, not really a stalemate, but we definitely have we don't see eye to eye, right? And so you may have a situation where the person who's advocating for that decision is very influential, very charismatic, very persuasive, and is a lot louder or more vocal than the people that don't necessarily want to make that decision or want to do a certain thing, right? But as they always say, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Okay. And so you have to be cognizant of that also and realize that um, you have to be able to defend your point, your stance. You can't defend your stance as to why we should go a certain way or why we should make a certain decision. Then you're pretty much doomed, or you're gonna end up just following whatever decisions people make. Okay. The next one is individuals substituting group responsibility for individual responsibility for the decision. All right. So what we're doing here is basically we are going with the group instead of just saying how we really feel. Okay. We're gonna say, okay, well, the group thinks that, so um, I'm gonna just let the group be responsible instead of me taking responsibility and making my own decision. I'm gonna lean on the group to make my decision for me, right? And so again, you just some polarization there because that may not necessarily be a decision you would have made, but because you decided that you wanted to leave the responsibility decision to the group, you kind of stuck with the way things are. All right. So one thing about groups, we have what we something called group think, right? And so group think is basically when you have one person who has an idea or decision or a course of action, and everyone else follows along because they are really afraid of upsetting the person that's promoting this idea, or um, they don't want to go against the person that's advocating for this particular course of action. And so even though they may know that the decision is wrong and is going to lead to failure, because you know the pressure of being inclusive, right, or feeling inclusive, feeling part of the team, right, is so much, you decide that you're going to just roll with the poor decision that was made. Okay. Some of the effects of groupthink, failure to perceive non-obvious risks and drawbacks of an alternative. Probably the most important one to me, right? In my opinion, I should say, because if you follow group thinking and you don't speak up, then you're going to have to deal with those consequences. And so, if you see a bad plan or something that is not the best decision, you probably need to speak up, because then you will be saving yourself a lot of pain, time, money, probably, right? And you just can't sit by idly and let people make decisions that are wrong. Okay. Also, you can have kind of the rejection of expert opinions. Again, let's take for instance COVID, and let's think about the mask and how long that took to really be put in effect. Okay. I'm sure that Dr. Fauci was an advocate for masks from the very beginning, but the president was not. All right. And so, because he's the president, and no one wanted to ruffle his feathers, a lot of people probably agreed, like, no, we don't need masks, we don't need masks. Although they might have been thinking, Dr. Fauci's right, we need to, go ahead and employ masks, but they didn't speak up, right? And so it just ended up that the president will, his what he wanted to do was what was done, although, the group in itself probably thought otherwise, but because of groupthink, they all decided, hey, we're just going to follow the president, whatever he says, because we don't want to piss him off, right? We don't want to upset him. We don't want to be ostracized or kicked out of the crew, right? So you have to think about those things when you're making group decisions, and how you know someone whose mind is set on a particular decision, and how much they push it, right? And your ability to say no, and then, like, that is not a good decision. We should not be, making those types of decisions, uh, because that's not the right thing to do. It's not going to really favor us, right? So some of the things that some of the circumstances that could favor groupthink, right? Strong group cohesiveness. If we're a really tight group, um, a lot of times groupthink will kick in, because you know we're more personal, familiar with each other. Okay, it's kind of like family, right? And so we don't necessarily want to upset anybody within our family. We don't want to piss them off. We're probably more kin with our family than anybody else. But because of that, we know them. We will probably refrain from saying certain things. Whereas with a stranger, it's very unlikely you're going to refrain from hurting that stranger's feelings, because you don't really care. You don't know them. They're strangers. You just met them, or you're not really familiar with them. Even they, maybe you've known them in passing. Um, you're not gonna really, you're not gonna sit around and let them make a bad decision. And so you have strong group cohesiveness, it very much so that group think can definitely seep in. Okay. Leaders promotion of a preferred solution. Again, as I said in the example before with the president, former president, and the mask and Dr. Fauci, that's a perfect example of how group think, and the leader's preference can dominate decision making process, and you end up with some bad decision making. Although the expert opinion, right, is to do something else, right? And the installation of the group from experts' opinion, right? Keeping that expert out, right? You know what? Don't invite Dr. Fauci to the meetings anymore, because he's just not doing or saying the things I want to hear. which is very much, something that's done all the time, right? I don't want to hear it. Don't let them in. Okay. Some of the symptoms of groupthink, right? Illusion of invulnerability. Basically, you think you're indestructible, or you think that nothing can happen, and that the decision, because it was agreed upon by the group, can't be wrong, right? Which is not the case at all. Okay. Um, Direct pressure on the member, right? Again, if someone is making a decision, and everyone else agrees with it because of their position or their sway in the group, there's a lot of pressure on that group, or that person, excuse me. Right? There's a lot of personal pressure on that person, because now you have, put a decision on the table and everyone is following you. And so you have to be cognizant of that. Right. And then you got your shared illusion of, anonymity. Right. And so basically, um, I get to kind of stay quiet, and I also get to be part of the group without and make a decision without actually making the decision, right? And so no one will really know that I don't agree with that, right? Because I decided to, support the group, right? And so we all are, saying, hey, we all share the same decision, same thought process. And so we are going to, make this decision here, or go this way, and hopefully this is the outcome. But it's not really real if we, as one person decides, or one person thinks in their mind that the particular decision is not the correct one, but they still roll with it, because what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a bad outcome, when you could have stopped something. A good example of groupthink is, it it is definitely, predates all of us, right? But if you look at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, and that whole situation with Russia and the United States, you will see how groupthink almost caused us to get into a war. Okay. And so you take a look at that, and that particular case scenario, and that'll give you a good example of groupthink, and how groupthink can go extremely wrong, very quickly. Okay. Fortunately, it didn't amount to, a full blown war, but there were some pretty tense moments, in that situation. Again, it's the Bay of Pigs, and I'm sure you've heard it referenced before. Is with President Kennedy, and the Russian president, I can't remember his name, in Cuba, and it's almost going to, World War III, basically. All right. So some ways to, prevent groupthink. All right. The leader definitely needs to be impartial, right? Leader needs to be objective, and not be so stuck on what they think is right, prior to listening to other people's views, especially if we're getting, input from an expert, right? So you want to listen to those experts as much as you can. Some leaders are not like that. Some leaders are very much, hey, I know everything, whatever I say goes. And they could very well know everything in a certain vein, but they don't know everything, in the world. Okay. And so you have to kind of look at that and think about, okay, how, as a leader, how can I be objective and open, and make sure that people feel like they can voice their opinion, even if it goes against what I think. All right. You got organization prescriptions, right? You could set up different groups, right, that aren't necessarily, at that same venue or the same meeting, and they kind of independent, and they look at the issue or the decision, as a third party. Okay. You could be a critical thinker, right? And not be afraid of saying, hey, I don't think this decision is right. We need to take a break, or we need to, really think about this, um, a little bit more, right? And you get to process prescriptions, right? Periodically break the group into subgroups to discuss the issues. So these are kind of what we call, breakout sessions, or breakout sessions, the best term, right? When we sit down and we say, hey, you know what, we're gonna break this group up, this meeting up into some different groups. You guys discuss it within yourselves, and then come back with, a decision, and why you think we should do that decision. And that way, you kind of, you alleviate the pressure from the group, right? And you break it into smaller groups, but at the same time, if the person who's the most vocal is in another group, and this group here is, has some open-minded, rational folks who are very objective, who are very objective, then you can come to some pretty good decision making that's not biased and doesn't necessarily, lead to any group think. Okay. So participation, again, is a big aspect of group decision making, right? How involved do employees want to be, right? And employees should be involved in, in decision making, especially as a group, right? Some of the benefits that, can be attained or gained from having your employees participate is that they feel more vested in whatever the project or goal is, right? They feel like they have a say, and that really just kind of um, really helps in them understanding what their value is to the company and to the team and to the overall accomplishing the mission, right? It helps in solving problems, right? Complex problems, right? We say two brains are better than one, right? And so again, it leads to better solutions. It leads to more solutions, right? So you get an opportunity to have a lot of ideas out there that you can really evaluate and get the best outcome possible. Okay. Okay. So some solving difficulties, right? Factors limiting generation alternatives phase, right? Um, some reactions to the alternative, right? Um, that they're not, they may not really support the um, the decisions that are made, right? And so when you look at um, if someone proposes an idea that's not necessarily the one that's the main one or an alternative, the more people don't like it, the um, less likely it is to be selected, right? Even if it's right. So that's the whole point. It's like even if it's the best course of action, um, doesn't mean that everyone's gonna like it, right? And if everyone doesn't like it, but it's still the best choice, you have an opportunity, or there's a chance that it may not be chosen, even though it's the best opportunity or best alternative. And so you end up with, again, a decision that's bad based on the fact that people didn't like it, or maybe there were things in there that involved people having to do a little extra or more than they wanted. And although it is the best, option, they weren't, really happy about it. So it's more likely that alternative would not get chosen, right? Um, Sometimes you have the status and the positional power of certain people that um, will stifle, those members of a team that aren't as confident in themselves to speak up, right? And then you have limitations on ID generation posed by the group leader. Again, the leader has a lot of sway and influence on um, how ideas get presented. If people are even open to presenting ideas, right? The minute you start to, make people feel like they will be, ridiculed for coming up with an idea, or that you're going to, embarrass them or disrespect them in front of people because you don't like the idea, or you think that idea is stupid, or whatever the case may be, then you're going to get less and less input, less and less ideas, and then the decisions that are made will be mostly based on what you think, right, as a leader. And we don't necessarily want that, because as a leader, does it you need to get the input of the people that work for you, work with you, in order to make the best decision, not just from your personal perspective. Doesn't really work well that way. Nothing really turns out well when it's just when it's one person making the decision. So we want to, kind of stay away from that and not necessarily have that be, the way we do things. Okay. Um, some problem solving techniques that we employ on a regular basis: brainstorming, nominal group techniques, and then the Delphi technique. Okay. So when it comes down to decision making, we have to have folks that are creative in nature. Okay, ability to think out the box. Now, it's not everybody is creative, right? Some people are just black and white. I'm very pretty much black and white. I'm not a super duper out of the box thinker. I make decisions based on what I know, where I want to go, and that kind of thing, right? The resources available to me, and sometimes I don't come up with the most creative um, decisions, in which always is solve a problem, but I get the problem solved either way, right? So there's a lot of creativity that can be garnered when we're talking about making decisions, especially in a group level. We want someone, we want people that are very creative and think differently. All right. Steps in the creative process, of course, is preparation. All right. You prepare, whatever idea it is that you have, and some of the things that go along with it. Incubation, you let it sit. Right. It's like kind of a marinating process, or just a reflection time. All right. To really think about, okay, this is the idea I have, or this is the decision, or the proposal I'm gonna pitch. Let me sit on it, right? You hear that term. Let me sit on it. Let me think about it, right? This is where the incubation comes in. Where you really think about it and you really vet out all the aspects of your particular decision just to make sure that, you look at it from every angle and you've covered all the potential, risk that could be involved with this particular decision, right? Some insight, understanding what's going on, maybe having some other knowledge about other things and that people not everyone may be privy to, and that kind of thing, right? And then verification, how about talking to somebody else about it, okay, and letting them give you what they think about your idea, what you're going to be an advocate for, okay. Some descriptors are creative individuals, okay. Of course, background experiences, that's always number one to me, right? Your experiences definitely will help you to be more creative in your decision making because you've seen, a lot of things and you have a lot of things to pull from in order to come up with some kind of solution, right? Um, Many times, there'll be a problem, and it'll be, a problem that a adolescent is having as compared to an adult. In your 20s, a decision um, looks different than it does in your 40s. Okay. Or it will look different than in your 40s, right? Because you had different experiences. And now you can draw from those experiences and say, you know what? I know what to do in this situation. Whereas, early on in your 20s, you're really not really sure about certain things. So, you might make a poor decision. But as you get older, you have more experiences, you will definitely draw from those experiences. Your personal traits, right? If you're risk averse, or if you're very spontaneous or outgoing, or cautious, right? Those all those play in, how you know people come up with their creativity and how open they are to being creative and trying to solve different problems. And then your cognitive abilities, right? And that's something you can really control, right? How smart you are and the way you think. Now you can always enhance your mind and with information. But again, there's sometimes people are just born with certain skill sets, right? That we're cognitively just superior to others, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We're all different, and so you need to leverage those folks that are, more cognitively adept, and let them give you their 2 cents. Okay. How do you enhance creativity in organization, right? You make sure that you reward creativity. Okay, we creative success, right? And so, if someone came up with some kind of novel idea and it was just a blockbuster and it worked really well, right? You need to make sure that you acknowledge that person and you reward that person in a in a way that is commensurate uh, with um, their actions and what the outcome was. Okay, let's see here. So, all right. So, this is basically the end of the chapter, or yeah, the end of this particular section. Okay. All right. So, again, go back, reread the chapter. If you missed anything, these questions are really kind of a guide to help you pull out the salient points that you should really, know and have an understanding of. All right. All right. So I will talk to you next week, and have a good week, and make sure you get your work in.